Hey friends, so as I mentioned in my vlog about my word vomits, I have been reading my old essay entries and I have been taking notes and I have been just going through all my old stuff, and it has been a very eye-opening experience. It's been very how I would say, it's trippy. It's kind of it's a lot to take in, right? And I feel like I'm learning a lot. I feel like I am going through a lot. So backstory is I started my writing project in 2012 and I just wanted to write a million words for the sake of becoming a better writer. I didn't know what would come out of it apart from becoming a better writer. And I am a better writer now. It's been 8 years. I've written over, so the way the project is laid out is I'm trying to do 1,000 sets of 1,000 words, so 1,000 essays of 1,000 words, but they're not, they're not tidied up and edited the way you would with like blog posts or professional essays or whatever. It's basically live journaling. Live journal. It's basically journaling. And when I first started out, I kind of intentionally was avoiding writing for a public audience, but I was publishing it on a publicly accessible site, but I wasn't sharing it with people. So it was a big change from the blogging that I was doing before that. And I did a lot of rambling, did a lot of introspection, did a lot of talking to myself, trying to cheer myself up sometimes, trying to motivate myself, trying to challenge myself, psychoanalyze myself. It's like do some self-therapy in a way. I didn't know with any confidence what would happen, but so I did that, from 2012, 2013, 2014, every year. I just kept doing it week after week. Sometimes I would have weeks where I didn't write anything, and sometimes I would be writing almost every day. Sometimes I would even write thousands of words in a single day. And I made a couple of attempts in the past to reread the old stuff, but never anything quite as substantial as this. So right now I'm really making a concerted effort to read everything. And I'm still, I'm semi-skimming. It's not like I'm reading every single word line by line carefully. Because I remember when I was writing it, I was, just rolling with it. I wasn't being super deliberate about it, which was the intent. I didn't want to overthink anything. I wanted to just kind of let the fire hose spray out as much as possible. And what's been interesting is that there are these broad patterns and themes that I wasn't consciously trying to put together. I was just writing about whatever I was dealing with at the time. And now, almost a decade later, I have the privilege and luxury of going through it at my own pace. And and part of the reason I'm doing it is because I'm writing an ebook called Introspect. And I wrote it, edited it, reworked it, wasn't happy with it, put it on ice for a while, and I came to the conclusion that I should reread my own introspection to get a sense of what I've learned, right? So I if you just ask me what have you learned, I can say a bunch of things, but it's like talking about an old movie that you liked a long time ago and you haven't watched it in a while. I feel like it's worth watching it again to see what has changed. You have new perspective. You're a new person now, right? As time passes, and that is indeed true. It is. I am a very different person than I'm. So it's layered, right? I'm the same person that I was then, and I'm also a different person than the person I was then, and that is part of what is remarkable about journaling, introspective journaling over a long period of time. You get to see what stays constant and you get to see what changes, and I think that gives you insight into your personality, your character, your traits, your behaviors, even the things that like environmental factors and contextual factors and things beyond your control, or things that you couldn't even perceive at the time while you were writing it. These things become more apparent with time. And so in this video, I want to talk about something that has been becoming clear to me which is the language of coercion. And when I say coercion, I mean, using force, or you might think that coercion means violence, but it's not necessarily violence, right? Just think about what a coercive environment is like. It's just, there's pressure, there's threats, right? There's this atmosphere of you're supposed to do something or you have to do something, and there's just this looming anxiety or this looming tension that you have to do this because it's the law, or it's because it's proper, or it's right, whatever. There's pressure to do things. And I feel like when I read my older writing, particularly 2013, 2014, there was quite a bit of coercive language. And what is that like? I was tweeting about this recently. I just want to go into a bit more detail. I would say things like, and I meant it when I said it, and I thought it was coming from a genuinely well-intentioned place, which is why it's so trippy to experience. I was saying things like, I have to surveil myself constantly, right? Like I have to be constantly watching myself, almost like a like a boss that doesn't trust his employees and installs, I don't know, like surveillance software or cameras or whatever to kind of watch over them. It's this kind of prison guard mentality, or this authoritarian mentality. There's a bunch of little things like that. What else? I would say things like I need to destroy a certain part of myself. Like there's a part of me that's sabotaging another part of me, and I should repress and punish that part of me. And I would self-flagellate. Like, if I haven't been productive, I would be like apologizing to myself, or just putting on this very groveling, kind of pathetic response. And what's really jarring for me to read now is that all of that was happening entirely within myself, in a context where I'm writing primarily for myself. There's no teacher or parent or boss who's kind of there to judge me, right? It's just me. I'm judging myself, right? And I know some of the details of what happened. I know that I spiraled into a depression. I know that I was miserable and unhappy and stressed and frustrated. And I had older tweets saying things like, when I was depressed in 2015, my life, even though I was married to a woman that I loved, I was in a job with colleagues that I respected, and doing work that I felt was reasonably satisfying and exciting and interesting. Life felt like a jail sentence at the time, and that made me depressed. And what is becoming clear to me now, that was completely not apparent then, was that I was the one who was subjecting myself to the jail experience, right? Like when I said that my life felt like existence felt like a prison sentence, I was interpreting it at the time to be like, circumstances are like that. The fact that I have a mortgage and a job and I have to pay the bills, I have to go to work every day, like that feels like a jail sentence. Like a, it's broader. You're not in a literal cell, but it felt like I really did feel my spirit was broken at the time. I remember very clearly. I remember how miserable I was. And what is kind of jarring for me now and kind of unsettling and dealing with it and kind of appreciating it is, it's kind of stressing me out a little bit. It's kind of making me it gets me emotional, I guess, right? It gets me kind of shaken up to realize the truth of what was going on, which was that I was complicit in my jailing, right? And it's not, I inherited a lot of that. It isn't like I came out of my mom, right? I wasn't born with an impulse for self-coercion. I learned it from the world around me. I learned it a little bit from my family. I learned, I think, a lot of it from school, and a bunch of it from just broader social cues, right? Like just, and and that's giving me some new perspective on just generally this cult of productivity in the world, like just the sense of you have to make money and you have to make sure that all of your time is well spent in a productive, economically productive way. You should monetize your hobbies, and like everything you're doing should be in service of a certain kind of ideal that is productive in some way. And in 2012, 2013, I had just gotten married. I just gotten my first job. I very much had a huge chip on my shoulder. I have a blog post that says boulder on my shoulder. I had a huge chip on my shoulder for all the ways in which I had failed as a student, and all the ways in which just I didn't do well in school. I didn't get good grades, didn't make it to university, and I just felt like I was not enough. I felt like I was betraying myself at some level. I really believed that, like in my heart. I really felt that I was, a naughty boy, not an irresponsible man. Like I was going through that transition from childhood, late teens to end of your adolescence, beginning of adulthood. I was a young man, and I felt incompetent, weak, irresponsible, dysfunctional, just broken and weak, cowardly in some ways. And I was trying to practically bully myself into becoming a better person. And what I now know and now believe to be true is that you can't bully someone into becoming a better person, because what they will, even if it succeeds in producing the behavior that you think you want, that behavior is because it was drawn out from somebody through the bullying, through the coercion, and the shaming and the guilting and whatever. What they learn and what I learned at the time, or had been learning up until that point, is that bullying and guilting and coercion is how you get things done, right? By putting pressure that is, kind of harsh and it's not inviting, right? It's needy. It's just it's this very bad cocktail of negative elements. And to be fair, I did always also have positive elements in me the whole time. I think, I had great elements in my being when I was a child, reading books. I would go to the library, borrow books, whatever felt interesting. I would read and read and read. Nobody had to bully or coerce me into reading. I did it because I loved it. Same for video games. But, at the time, I thought video games I was convinced that video games were trivial entertainment, like fast food, like junk stuff, like stuff that you should be ashamed and embarrassed of, in the sense that it's you shirking your responsibilities as a student or as whatever else. And so I started out kind of pure, I would say, and then I inherited and learned all of these behaviors and beliefs that are coercive, and they don't even work. That's the part that's really jarring for me. They don't even produce the outcomes that you want. They produce, they might sort of produce like something, you might get like marginally better results, but you contaminate the soul of the person. Like I really believe this, and when I say soul, I don't mean a metaphysical thing, but just the vibe, the beliefs, the intangible essence of the person, like all of the things that's not said, the cultural layer of the person all the way inside, beneath the thought. Like, so there's the conscious thoughts that come out, but underneath the conscious thoughts are beliefs about how the world is and how life is, and what means what matters, what, all of those things. That stuff can get contaminated, and if that stuff gets contaminated by coercive ideas, ideology potentially, I'm kind of torn between talking about these things in very grandiose terms and talking about it in a very practical sense. And I think the practical stuff is more important. The point is, like, hearing that kind of language all the time, it shaped the way I was thinking, and it shaped the way I saw my relationship with myself. And I think some people don't even go so far as to think of a relationship with oneself as like two things. Like they kind of they kind of smush everything together, and they see themselves as having a singular voice, a singular face, name, right? Your face doesn't change, sure, but like just there's a centralized identity. It's very dictatorial. It's like an authoritarian dictator, fascist. Like total control over the self from a centralized thing. There's a fascist element to it that you're kind of hoping to keep your soldiers of your mind in line with more and more control, harsher punishments, that kind of thing. And I recognize that there's a whole spectrum in how people think and talk about these things. And again, it depends on what kind of cultures you're from. If, you might be raised by like very hippie parents who believe in like non-violence and non-coercion and unschooling, homeschooling, like no regimented structure and stuff. And then you can kind of go off the deep end on that. And, it's the whole order to chaos kind of thing where too much structure becomes tyranny and too little structure becomes chaos, and both of those things kind of don't work, or they have problems that cause second order, third order effects that can be quite terrible. And I thought that I grew up kind of chaotic and anarchic in some ways, and I experienced failure and heartbreak and disappointments with that. And so some part of me felt that, okay, I got to swing my pendulum all the way to the other end and be as tyrannical over myself as I possibly could. And that, I did get some things done. I did. It is true that the few years that I was at work, I was the most productive I had ever been in my life up until that point. So as a teenager, I had no structure, I had no project management skills, I didn't know how to think about my school and stuff, and I didn't allow anybody else to control me, including myself, I guess. And so I was very, very unproductive as a teenager. Although I did make some music, which was from a non-coercive kind of place. But anyway, at work, I tried to coerce myself into, like, regulate myself, coerce myself, control myself into doing as much work as possible. And I did get quite a bit of work done, but I was also agonized. I was depressed. I was frustrated. I was miserable. I was so miserable. And at my own hand. And I convinced myself that the reason that I was miserable was not because of me, but not because of my regimentation or my regulation of myself, but because, I was kind of making up for lost time. I was paying the costs of my past self's failures and indiscretions, right? Like, it's like I'm paying up the debt. And if I wouldn't have been able to have had a nuanced, thoughtful conversation about this 7 years ago, because I didn't have the context that I have now. So I worked for 5.5 years. I left my job. I have been working for myself since. I do consulting work. I have a Patreon. I sell ebooks. I produce content. And now the pendulum has swung to something kind of in a happy Goldilocks middle between order and chaos. And I'm way more productive than I've ever been, and I'm happier than I've ever been. So it's really, once I've experienced this kind of happy medium, I look back at all of my past experiences with fresh eyes, and I realize the ways in which I was failing myself at both ends of the extreme. I do think that in some way, to some degree, I probably had to experience the whole spectrum before I even know what a healthy middle way is. But I do wish that I had, people that I respected and admired that I could talk to about this, who could give me perspective. The only person I respected that much was my boss. And, that's kind of a conflict of interest type thing there where, we did have a very productive relationship, and he is, after I left work, he's still one of my favorite people, and I would go to him for advice on things because, he's got his shit together and he's productive. But he doesn't coerce himself the way I put myself, the way he doesn't do to himself what I put myself through, because he's always been kind of productive. He never had to do the pendulum thing. And so when he's, in my opinion, when he is taking action, he is doing what seems natural and correct to him. And it took me this overcorrection and then a reversion a little bit to come around to this more natural state. And I could talk about this for hours, but I don't want to make this video too long. I just want to say that I guess to share that concept of the pendulum of order and chaos, and the idea that you can be too coercive with yourself in a way that might seem marginally more productive in the short run, but is deeply damaging in some way. And it's very heartening for me as I continue to read my word vomits. I read, like the first 200,000 or so words were really me kind of descending into that coercive space. And then as I approached like 300,000, I start to think about the failure of that mode. I start to realize that, hey, if you imagine my head as a place, or my body, whatever, my person, as a team of people, or as a parent and a child, right? But let's go with the team metaphor. I'm this team of kind of newbies, untested rookies, people who, like a whole group of people with different goals, different desires, different intents, different skill sets, different abilities, and me, the conscious person who is speaking. Actually, even now when I'm speaking, it's not entirely the ego, the kind of authoritarian self. Like once you keep going, it feels like when you're in flow, it's the other members of the team join in, so it's a whole collaborative team effort, right? And like being able to harness the team in your head is like a multiplier on whatever you do. But what I used to be doing was I used to be talking over. I was like a really shitty boss. I wouldn't listen to my team, my colleagues, my employees, whatever, the people in my head. I wouldn't listen to them. I wouldn't hear what they have to say. I didn't take any of their concerns seriously, right? I just considered them to be a bunch of irresponsible, stuck up, unenlightened, just every negative thing you can think about. I thought that about myself inside my head. And then I tried to like drive them with a stick. Like, you better do this or you're a terrible person, and that kind of thing. And yeah, it paved the way to a pretty shitty relationship with myself. And like I can sense that, and sometimes when you get tired and you don't have the energy to boss yourself around, then there's this retaliation. There's that, I'm just gonna pig out, eat junk food, smoke cigarettes, not care about anything, and kind of fuck around and get drunk or whatever. And what I have been doing in the years since, I realized, has been rehabilitating that relationship between, if we don't say boss and employees, we say parent and child, right? Like just the authority and the rest, right? There's a hierarchy in a sense. There's a lot of different ways you can model the relationships between your various constituent selves. And for me, it's very natural and obvious to think of myself as many people or as many selves, whatever, Maybe some people don't relate to that whatsoever, but I think you probably do, right? You have competing desires, you have competing goals. Like, you want to be fit, but you also want to lounge, right? How do you handle that conflict? If you watch Inside Out, which is like a movie about a bunch of different feelings trying to work together as a team, and then you watch like The Avengers, which is a group of different people trying to work together as a team. Like, it's technically the same movie. It's about a team trying to work together, and we have conflicting desires, conflicting goals. And how do you decide what you're going to do? How do you decide what your priorities are? What is the system of making decisions in your head? And are you being fair to the people in your head, right? I wasn't. And I mean, I don't know if it's possible to be fair every step of the way, right? Like how, if like with parents, they might have ideals like, I want to be fair to my kids. I want to give them all the space they need, all the whatever resources they need, help them, whatever. And then you actually have a kid and you're sleep deprived and they're making lots of noise and you just want to yell at them sometimes. And, I get it. And when I think about my relationship with myself, I find that I have even more sympathy for parents because it must be so difficult, right? And I don't think that it's possible to expect yourself to be perfect in the way you conduct your relationships within yourself or with other people, right? It's like a fractal thing, right? It's like as below, so above, or as above, whatever. It's self-similar. And I have just been thinking about so what really matters is not so much getting it right perfectly the first time around, but kind of being open to the fact that you will make mistakes and you will sometimes act up out of anger or trauma response or just whatever it is in the moment. You might be too harsh on yourself. And then you have to review and recalibrate and have the difficult conversations with yourself about what is fair, what is right, what is just. And I think I have made a bunch of progress in unlearning my coercion. And the cool thing is, in the process of trying to coerce myself, I did try to learn things like project management and how to make a to-do list and get it done, how to prioritize and all those things. And as I dial back the coercion, all of those skills that I learned still apply. I can still get myself to do things. It's just that now when I want to do something, I don't just yell at myself in my head that I better do it. I take the time to sell myself on it. I come up with the narrative. I come up with the explanation. And it's so funny to me to realize that when I was a kid, I used to say things like, I don't like being told what to do by parents or teachers or authorities. Help me understand why I have to do it and then I'll do it. It didn't occur to me that is also true within myself. And now that I know that, I find that I am, I don't want this to be framed in terms of this is what you need to do to be more effective. Because I would say the relationships are the point. Having a healthy relationship with yourself is the point. Being happy in your life, day to day, moment by moment, that is the point. But the cool thing is when you do that, you will become more productive because all hands are on deck, right? So it's trippy for me to realize how late for me it feels late, but I know there are people who are adults in their 30s, 40s, 50s who still probably haven't had this kind of minor enlightenment or awakening or a reckoning, right? Like coming to terms with the ways in which you are coercive. And I feel like I can see the change in my face when I look at my older videos. Go back, if you want to go and look for my videos from like 2015 or whatever, and you can see that in my face I look so tired, and I can't even recreate that face. It's just all the muscles are all like just weary and tired and defeated. I looked like a guy who was bullied, which I was by myself, right? And I think people can sense this in another person. And I haven't even begun to get into the ways in which like societies interface, like the way you interface with the broader culture around you, the people around you, your extended family, your friends of friends, people at work, people at wherever you hang out, right? The community of colleagues or whatever, your Twitter acquaintances, right? Like all of these things affect the way you construct meaning and the way you think about how the world is and how it should be and what your place in it is. Anyway, I'm going to end this video here. I will definitely be talking more about this because it's a revelation for me to realize that I can actually kind of reduce a lot of the complexity and frustration that I was dealing with into this somewhat simple model of, how coercive are you with yourself and with others, right? And I think very often it's very self-similar. If you feel like society is coercing you to be a certain way, do certain things, blah, 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 I think it's very natural to then replicate that internally and replicate that in your relationships and, kind of be coercive in the way you conduct yourself with other people, right? Telling them what to do, bullying them, soft bullying them, kind of shaming them, embarrassing them into things. I think there's a better way. I think we can be inviting. I think we can be open. We can let people be free. We can take the time and energy to ask people how they feel about things and really listen, like really give them the space to explore. One of the great things that my boss did for me was he was so curious about my motivations and my interests and my behaviors, more so than I was curious about myself. So sometimes, if let's say I missed a deadline at work, he would ask me, "Hey, why didn't you ship that?" And I'd be like, "Oh, I'm such a terrible person. I'm so sorry." It's like, no, don't tell me that stuff. You're a smart guy. Tell me what happened so that we can fix it. Like he didn't want me to perform contrition. He didn't want me to kind of how do you say like prostrate myself before his authority and his power and perform that shame. Right? He genuinely wanted to understand what led to a certain pattern of behavior so that when we really understand it and we face it for what it is, we can evaluate it, see how we can change it, and figure out a more equitable solution for everybody. And I learned that intellectually, but now it's really getting to me like in my heart. Like it's really like, oh my god, like we don't have to be coercive people within ourselves, with other people. We can be free people. Like that's really something I find exciting. Let me know what you think. Let me know if you've had any such experiences or revelations for yourself, and maybe this, if I'm hopeful, like if you've never considered this, because I didn't consider it for a long time, if this is the first time you're considering it, I would love to hear from you. And done. Thanks for hanging out.